My beloved child. Stop scrolling for just a moment. Do not rush past these words as though they are like every other message you have seen today. There is a reason your eyes stopped here. There is a reason your heart suddenly became quieter. Something within your spirit recognized a whisper before your mind could understand it. Whether you realize it or not, you have been carrying a question deep inside you, a question you have never fully spoken aloud. You have wondered if someone, somewhere, could ever truly see who you are beneath every disappointment, every misunderstanding, every silent sacrifice, every tear you wiped away before anyone noticed. You have wondered if your story has been invisible to the world. Tonight, I ask you to pause. Because this is a fictional story of hope and divine imagination, but perhaps it will awaken something true inside your heart. There has been movement beyond what human eyes could ever perceive. Not movement that forces another person's choices, not destiny that removes free will, but the quiet unfolding of conversations, realizations, and moments that can change how people see one another. And within this story, someone finally spoke your name in a way it had never been spoken before. Not with gossip. Not with judgment. Not with assumptions. But with truth. Your soulmate, who for so long carried an incomplete picture of who you were, suddenly heard words that reached places inside their heart they believed had gone silent. It was not because someone exaggerated your goodness. It was because someone described the parts of you that you never advertise. They spoke of your kindness when no one is watching. They spoke of your loyalty that survived betrayal. They spoke of the strength hidden behind your gentle voice. They spoke of the battles you fought in secret while still finding reasons to encourage other people. And as those words were spoken, something shifted. Not around the world. Not across the heavens. But inside one human heart. There are moments that divide a life into before and after. Moments that seem ordinary while they happen, yet become unforgettable long after they pass. In this story, that conversation became one of those moments. Your soulmate tried to pretend the words did not matter. They smiled politely. They changed the subject. They acted as though nothing had happened. Yet the moment they were alone, your name returned. It echoed. Again. And again. And again. Not because they were commanded to think of you. Not because they lost control of themselves. But because truth has a way of lingering long after conversations end. My beloved child, have you ever noticed how one honest sentence can outweigh years of misunderstanding? One moment of clarity can suddenly rearrange memories that never made sense before. The smallest revelation can cause someone to replay hundreds of old moments through entirely different eyes. That is where this story begins. Your soulmate began remembering details they had ignored. The kindness they once dismissed suddenly seemed extraordinary. The patience they overlooked suddenly became beautiful. The silence they misunderstood suddenly felt meaningful. Little pieces began connecting together like stars forming a constellation that had always existed but had never been noticed. They started asking themselves questions they had never dared ask before. What if I misunderstood them? What if they were never who I assumed they were? What if I walked away from something rare? These questions did not bring immediate answers. Instead, they brought restless nights. The kind of nights where sleep comes, but peace does not. The kind of nights where every distraction eventually fades until only one thought remains. Your name. Perhaps you think you are forgettable. Perhaps you have believed that people move on without looking back. Perhaps life has convinced you that your presence leaves no lasting imprint. But this story invites you to imagine something different. Imagine that every quiet act of love you offered mattered. Imagine that every unseen sacrifice planted seeds somewhere beyond your awareness. Imagine that someone finally recognized the value you carried all along. Because sometimes the greatest transformations begin with recognition rather than reunion. There is something mysterious about being understood after a long season of being misunderstood. It feels like rain after drought. Like sunrise after endless clouds. Like hearing your own heartbeat after believing silence had become permanent. In this story, your soulmate experienced that realization from the opposite side. They began seeing you through eyes that had finally been cleansed of old assumptions. They wondered what your laughter sounded like now. They wondered whether your smile had changed. They wondered if you still believed in love. Most of all, they wondered whether they had missed the chance to truly know you. Questions have remarkable power. They open doors certainty keeps locked. And once a question enters the heart, it often refuses to leave quietly. Days passed. Life continued. Responsibilities remained. Yet something unusual kept happening. Every familiar place reminded them of you. A song they had ignored suddenly sounded different. A stranger's smile reminded them of your kindness. A passing conversation unexpectedly mentioned qualities that sounded exactly like yours. Coincidences? Or perhaps simply the human mind noticing what it had once overlooked. Either way, your presence became difficult to escape. Not because you were physically there, but because truth has a way of becoming unforgettable once it enters the heart. They remembered the way you cared more deeply than most people realized. They remembered your willingness to forgive. They remembered your resilience after disappointment. And suddenly they recognized something painful. They had seen your actions. But they had never truly understood your heart. My beloved child, many people are judged by chapters others never bothered to read. Many souls are misunderstood because the world prefers quick conclusions over patient understanding. Many beautiful hearts remain hidden because they speak softly while louder voices dominate every room. Yet truth never loses its value simply because it remains unnoticed for a season. Truth waits. Truth endures. Truth eventually finds someone willing to listen. In this fictional journey, someone finally listened. And once they did, nothing remained quite the same. Your soulmate found themselves comparing every conversation to the memory of yours. Every act of kindness reminded them of yours. Every shallow interaction highlighted the depth they once overlooked. They began realizing that what seemed ordinary before had actually been extraordinary all along. Have you ever misplaced something precious? Not because it lacked value, but because you failed to recognize its value until it was gone. That realization carries a unique kind of ache. Not dramatic. Not loud. But persistent. It whispers. It returns. It asks impossible questions. What if? Those two words can reshape entire futures. What if they were the one who truly understood me? What if I misunderstood them? What if our story still has unfinished pages? These questions became companions during quiet mornings and sleepless nights. And every answer seemed to lead back toward you. Yet this story is not only about another person's awakening. It is also about yours. Because while someone else was beginning to recognize your worth, you were still questioning it. You measured yourself by rejection instead of resilience. You counted losses instead of lessons. You looked at closed doors while forgetting how many storms you had survived. You wondered whether you were enough. But what if the question itself had always been wrong? What if your value never depended upon another person's recognition? What if love begins with truth rather than validation? The greatest mistake many hearts make is believing they become valuable only after someone chooses them. Yet stars remain stars even when clouds hide them. Diamonds remain diamonds while buried beneath ordinary earth. Music remains beautiful before anyone hears the first note. Worth exists before recognition. That is why this story matters. Because before anyone else could finally recognize your light, it had always been there. Hidden perhaps. Overlooked perhaps. But never absent. Your soulmate's growing awareness did not create your value. It simply uncovered what had always existed. That realization became impossible for them to ignore. One memory became 10. 10 became 100. Small moments they had forgotten suddenly returned with remarkable clarity. The conversation where you encouraged them. The look in your eyes when everyone else misunderstood them. The compassion you offered without asking for anything in return. The quiet loyalty that expected no applause. Memory became a mirror. And within that mirror, they finally saw you clearly. Yet clarity often brings another emotion. Regret. Not destructive regret. Not hopeless regret. But the painful awareness that time cannot be rewound. They wondered how many opportunities had quietly slipped away. How many conversations should have lasted longer. How many words should have been spoken. How many silences should have been broken. Meanwhile, you knew none of this. You continued living your ordinary days. You carried responsibilities. You fought private battles. You smiled when necessary. You remained strong even while feeling exhausted. Completely unaware that somewhere, another heart had begun revisiting your story one memory at a time. There is something profoundly mysterious about unseen turning points. They rarely announce themselves. They arrive quietly. Like dawn. Like falling leaves. Like prayers answered in unexpected ways. You often recognize them only after life has already changed. This story has reached one of those moments. Because the conversation that awakened curiosity was only the beginning. What happened afterward became far more surprising. Someone who had remained silent for a very long time made an unexpected decision. Someone who possessed pieces of the story nobody else knew. Someone who had watched from a distance without interfering. That person quietly stepped forward. Not to create drama. Not to manipulate emotions. But because they believed truth deserved another witness. And the words they were about to speak would force your soulmate to question everything they believed about your past. But those words have not yet been spoken. And when they finally are, nothing in this story will remain the same. The silence that followed felt heavier than any words that had already been spoken. Your soulmate walked away believing the conversation was over, yet an invisible thread of curiosity continued pulling at their heart. They tried to focus on ordinary life, but ordinary life refused to stay ordinary. Every familiar routine seemed interrupted by unexpected reminders of you. It was as though every quiet moment invited your memory to return, not with noise, but with a gentle persistence that could not be ignored. The next morning began like every other morning, yet something felt different. They reached for their phone, not because they intended to search for you, but because your name had entered their thoughts before the day had even begun. They paused. Their heart wrestled with questions their mind could not answer. They wondered why they suddenly cared so deeply about someone they believed they had already understood. Yet the truth was becoming impossible to escape, they had never truly understood you at all. The hours moved forward, but peace refused to settle inside them. Conversations with other people felt distant. Laughter around them sounded hollow. Every distraction seemed temporary because one question continued echoing within them. Who are you, really? Not the version shaped by assumptions. Not the version built from rumors. Not the version created by misunderstandings. But the person hidden beneath every sacrifice that nobody applauded, every tear wiped away before sunrise, every prayer whispered when no one else was listening. Without realizing it, they had begun searching for the truth instead of searching for confirmation of what they already believed. That is where real transformation often begins. Not when someone receives every answer, but when they become willing to admit they never knew the whole story. Far away, another conversation was quietly unfolding. Someone who had known pieces of your journey for years found themselves unexpectedly speaking about you. They did not intend to change anyone's perspective. They simply spoke honestly. I don't think anyone realizes how much they carried without complaining. Those words landed softly. Then another followed. They were always protecting people who never even knew they needed protecting. Silence filled the room. No one interrupted. No one laughed. No one changed the subject. Instead, everyone listened. Your soulmate remained completely still. Every sentence seemed to remove another layer of misunderstanding that had covered your image for so long. Then came words they never expected to hear. They could have become bitter after everything they experienced, but somehow they chose kindness instead. Something inside them trembled. Kindness after pain. Compassion after disappointment. Hope after heartbreak. They had never looked at you through that lens before. Memories they once dismissed suddenly became impossible to forget. They remembered moments when you smiled while carrying burdens no one else noticed. They remembered times you encouraged others even while your own heart quietly needed encouragement. They remembered the patience you extended toward people who often failed to return the same grace. Each memory felt different now. Not because the memories had changed, but because understanding had finally arrived. They lowered their head. For the first time, they wondered whether they had mistaken strength for silence. Whether they had confused gentleness with weakness. Whether they had overlooked the extraordinary because it never demanded attention. A quiet conviction settled over them. Some of the rarest hearts are the ones that never announce their own value. My beloved child, within this fictional story, there are seasons when it feels as though goodness disappears unnoticed. There are moments when faithful hearts wonder whether anyone truly sees the love they continue giving. Yet sometimes recognition arrives later than expected, not because your worth was absent, but because another heart was not yet ready to perceive it. The days that followed became stranger. Your soulmate caught themselves smiling unexpectedly whenever your memory appeared. Then, just as quickly, that smile became regret. Regret for conversations cut short. Regret for assumptions made too quickly. Regret for opportunities that quietly slipped away. The heart has a remarkable way of revisiting unfinished chapters. It returns not because it enjoys pain, but because it longs for understanding. One evening they found themselves staring out a window long after the sun had disappeared. The world outside grew darker. Yet inside, another light had begun awakening. They whispered your name so quietly that even they barely heard it. The sound lingered in the room. It felt unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting. For a brief moment, they imagined what life might have looked like if they had truly known your heart from the beginning. That thought refused to leave. Hours passed. Sleep came slowly. Dreams arrived unexpectedly. Within those dreams they remembered conversations they had forgotten years ago. Small details returned with astonishing clarity. The kindness in your voice. The sincerity in your eyes. The peace you carried even during difficult moments. When morning arrived, they realized something that unsettled them completely. They could no longer think about you as the person they assumed you were. They had begun thinking about the person you actually were. And that realization changed everything. Still, the greatest revelation had not yet arrived. Because someone else was carrying a truth that had never been spoken aloud. A truth hidden for longer than anyone realized. A truth capable of explaining why so many misunderstandings surrounded your story. That person had remained silent out of respect. Out of caution. Out of fear that speaking would only create more confusion. But silence has limits. And those limits were about to be reached. Before another sunrise, a message would arrive. It would seem ordinary at first. Just a few simple words. Nothing dramatic. Nothing extraordinary. Yet those few words would open a conversation that neither of you could have anticipated. Inside that conversation rested a forgotten piece of your story. A piece that would force your soulmate to see every past memory through completely different eyes. And once that hidden truth was finally spoken, there would be no returning to the person they used to be.